Before we get started, I wanted to let everybody know that I have a new book that is available on Kindle, and it is called Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. 50 pages long, and if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it for free. Other than that, it's $3.99. So again, that is Recommended Reading for the True Conservative. And now, on with the podcast.
Jobs out there. I'll tell you that right now. A lot of bad jobs. Hell, my Uncle John runs a summer camp for kids about to get molested. I know, right? I know it sounds awful. Sounds awful, but he loves it. He's like... Says he's never worked a day in his life. Doesn't pay that much, but the benefits.
Good morning. It's Wednesday, Science Wednesday, May the 6th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and Professor Feynman. All that and more when I get back. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you, Maria, then Stu.
Markets this morning are higher. Take a look. We're 30 minutes away from the opening bell on Wall Street. Dow Industrials up 410 and the NASDAQ up 325. This is actually off of the best levels of the morning because President Trump put out a tweet and put some doubt out there in terms of whether or not the Iranians will agree to the memorandum of understanding. We're waiting to hear a confirmation that the Iranians have accepted the U.S.'s MOU. Meanwhile, we had some very good economic data, 109,000 jobs created in the ADP report, and White House Economic Director Kevin Hassett told me that he's predicting 4% economic growth for the rest of the year. That'll do it for us. I'll see you again tomorrow. Have a great day, everybody. Oil prices are down about 8% right now. Varney and Company picks it up. Stu, take it away.
It's a wonderful thing, Maria, and good morning to you. Good morning, everyone. New developments in the war, and this is another big day for your money. Start with this. The price of oil is down very sharply, falling well below $100 a barrel. At one stage, it was below 90. Right now, it's 95.83. That's just what stock investors wanted to see, and we've got a strong rally. Dow Industrials up 400, NASDAQ really on a tear, up over 300 points. That's better than 1%. So what happened to bring this on? An Axios report that the U.S. and Iran have a one-page, 14-point memo on the table and under discussion. It's the closest we've come to ending the conflict since the war began on February the 28th. However, President Trump just told the New York Post it's too soon, his words, to start thinking about face-to-face peace talks. Back to the memo, there's a 30-day window to open the Strait of Hormuz, a 12 to 15-year moratorium on uranium enrichment, a ban on underground facilities. Some Iranian financial assets will be unfrozen. In a post just hours ago, the president said if Iran agrees to what has been agreed to, the strait will be open to all, including Iran. If they don't, the bombing starts again, end quote. There is another big news, there's more big news on stock market today, and it's affecting AMD, which is up roughly 15% pre-market. It's been driven by a huge revenue gain from the company's AI operation, AI coming through for us today. There's political news, too. The president gets a shot in the arm from Indiana. His preferred candidates beat incumbent Republicans who had opposed Trump's redistricting plan. 5 big winners show MAGA's strength. Another Trump guy, Vivek Ramaswamy, he'll be the Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate in Ohio. Yeah, it is Wednesday, May 6th, and we'll be following the dramatic market moves for stocks and oil throughout the day. Varney and Company is about to begin.
Yes, it is. And nonprofit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. We recognize that our needs are just as important as theirs, and we don't owe them an explanation for taking care of ourselves. When we set these boundaries with emotional detachment, it's easier to enforce them because we're no longer emotionally invested in their reaction. Another critical component of emotional detachment is understanding that we don't have to engage in every conflict the liberal tries to initiate. Liberals often beat people into arguments or emotional confrontations as a way to maintain control. They may twist our words, provoke us, or attempt to gaslight us into doubting reality. When we detach emotionally, we stop feeling the need to engage in these manipulations. We can choose to remain calm, not because we are indifferent or uncaring, but because we recognize that engaging in their emotional games only serves to give them the power they seek. By detaching, we retain control over our reactions and stop feeding into their need for drama. Emotional detachment doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. It means choosing not to let the liberals' behavior control our emotional state. It's about recognizing that we are not responsible for their feelings, and their inability to regulate their emotions is not a reflection of our worth or value. When we detach, we protect our own mental and emotional well-being. We stop giving the liberal the power to dictate how we feel, and we start to focus on our own needs and desires rather than being constantly at their mercy. A key element of emotional detachment is also distancing ourselves from the liberal, both emotionally and physically, whenever possible. Liberals thrive on closeness because it gives them access to our vulnerabilities. They want us to be constantly available, to be their emotional support, and to be at their beck and call. Emotional detachment requires that we learn to pull back and create space between ourselves and the liberal. This may mean limiting our interactions with them, reducing the emotional energy we invest in the relationship, or even cutting ties altogether if necessary. The less emotionally involved we are, the less power the liberal has over us. Finally, detachment allows us to focus on ourselves and our own personal growth. Liberals often consume all the energy in the room, leaving little room for our own needs and desires. Emotional detachment creates a space we need to prioritize our own well-being, rediscover our passions, and invest in relationships that are mutually respectful and supportive. This influence will free ourselves to cultivate a life that is truly our own, grounded in self-respect. You know, it's a strange thing how little we understand about manipulation, especially when it's cloaked in charm, wrapped in vulnerability, and wielded with surgical precision. Now, I'm not here to demonize anyone, but I am here to shine a light on patterns, on chaos disguised as care. One of the most deceptive tactics employed by female liberals is the use of charm as a weapon. And this isn't the simple surface level charm we're accustomed to. It's not merely smiling or laughing at the right moments. This is calculated charisma, a type of relational camouflage, a highly adaptive strategy designed to disarm, confuse, and eventually control. And the most terrifying part is how effective it is, because it plays directly into our deepest instincts to trust, to connect, and to be needed. At first glance, these women can seem warm, intelligent, deeply empathetic. They often know how to read a room, to pick up on emotional undercurrents, and then tailor their responses to fit the ideal version of themselves that we're most likely to admire or protect. This is not genuine connection. It's mimicry. Mimicry of vulnerability, of sensitivity, of support. But behind that mask lies a far colder calculation of hunger for psychological dominance, a hunger to secure a position of emotional centrality in our lives, not because they value us, but because they need to dominate the narrative. They need to be in control of how others perceive us, how we perceive ourselves, and most crucially, how we perceive them. Now, this charm isn't used indiscriminately, it's deployed with a purpose. In the beginning, they will often present themselves as incredibly attentive. They ask questions. They listen with seeming intensity. They flatter. They mirror our language, our interests, even our fears. And because most people are starved for that kind of attention, they fall. We think that we have found someone who truly gets us, someone who validates our experience, someone who cares. But what's really happening is a psychological fishing expedition. They're extracting data, emotional data. They're learning our emotional vocabulary, our trauma history, our aspirations, so they can later manipulate us with precision. That charm is the bait, and our vulnerability is the hook. Once we're on it, the power dynamic begins to shift, slowly at first, almost imperceptibly. And it's so subtle, so wrapped in seemingly affectionate behaviors. But by the time the manipulation begins, we're already deeply entangled. The charm also serves another purpose. It creates plausible deniability. If we ever begin to question their intentions or behaviors, others won't believe us. After all, how could someone so lovely, so socially graceful, so emotionally articulate ever do something malicious? This is not accidental. The female liberal often curates her public image meticulously. She knows how to perform virtue. She's often involved in causes. She may be highly active in communities where empathy is currency. And yet, behind closed doors, she becomes someone else entirely. Cold, calculating, controlling. The transformation is so extreme that it creates cognitive dissonance. We start to question our own perceptions. We wonder if maybe we misread the situation, if maybe we are the problem. That confusion, that self-doubt is exactly what she wants. There's a kind of spiritual violence in this tactic because it manipulates the very qualities that make human relationships meaningful: vulnerability, trust, affection. It weaponizes those values, and once the weapon is in her hands, she doesn't need to scream or demand or coerce. All she has to do is smile. All she has to do is withdraw her approval or offer it with subtle strings attached, and you'll find yourself bending to her will without even realizing it. This is the power of charm strategically. It is a form of psychological warfare dressed up in sweetness, and it's devastatingly effective. One of the most insidious psychological strategies employed by female liberals is the weaponization of victimhood. Now, this isn't just playing the victim in a superficial way. This is theatrical suffering, that carefully curated narrative that frames her as perpetually misunderstood, mistreated, or oppressed. And what makes it so effective is that on the surface, it appears virtuous. She doesn't rage openly. She bleeds quietly, or at least appears to. And in doing so, she captures our attention, our sympathy, and most importantly, our guilt. This tactic is rooted in implicit manipulation of our moral framework. Most decent people accept an obligation to protect those who are hurting. When someone appears vulnerable, our instinct is to soften, to accommodate, to defend. That's the hook. But what we don't realize, at least not at first, is that this vulnerability is selective. It surfaces only when it benefits her, only when it redirects blame or diverts attention from her own destructive behavior. She doesn't use vulnerability to seek connection or resolution. She uses it to control the emotional field. It often starts subtly. A story about a cruel ex, an abusive parent, a toxic workplace, and we listen because who wouldn't? We offer comfort, support, and validation. But over time, a pattern emerges. Every conflict somehow places her in the same role. The innocent one, the misunderstood one, the one who tried her best even when the facts suggest otherwise. She will bend the narrative with remarkable skill, bending reality to suit her emotional needs. And if we dare challenge that story, if we raise even a reasonable objection, we're met with an overwhelming response. Tears, silence, accusations, or worse, a quiet withdrawal that signals we've hurt her. And here's where the trap closes, because our instinct is to fix it, to apologize, to overcorrect, not because we did something wrong, but because we've been cast in the role of the aggressor. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, X3 Techno.
You can't make this up.
What Mandami has done, and this is what happens with socialism, they deliberately take steps that make no sense and smile at you while they tell you it's the right thing to do. He has appointed a female fire chief who never served in the fire department. She was in the EMS department, which means that she was in the ambulances for 25, 30 years, treating people who were injured. That's an incredibly honorable position. That's not a fireman. What that move did and was designed to do is to show everybody, I am in control. I am doing things that are objectively ridiculous because I have the power. There is a movement going on that is a slow revolution, which makes people accept things that are objectively ridiculous. There is no competent human being in the world that would pick that person to be the fire chief of the New York City Fire Department. Somebody who didn't serve in that department for decades, who served in another department. And his explanation is, well, she was on many emergency scenes. But it's a she, and it's not from the fire department. And what it establishes is that he is controlling the narrative, and common sense doesn't apply anymore. This is the end of New York City if something doesn't happen in terms of a new election. Because, one, can you imagine all of the fire men and women who busted their ass for decades to move up the chain of command, who want to protect their organization, who got passed over for a semi-retired female emergency technician who never served in the fire department, and yet he has a press release and he's smiling at the camera. And I've seen that smile before. It's a dangerous smile. It's the smile of a borderline psychopath or sociopath who's like saying, I'm doing something that objectively looks wrong, and you guys are just accepting it. It's a way of enforcing a narrative on the population. It's bad for New York City. It's bad for society. And I think our society is polarizing into camps where rational thinking matters and where virtue signaling matters.
And that was X3 Techno. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little motivation.
This is the end. You're going to lose everything. You won't come out of this. You're not smart enough. You're not bright enough. You don't have the money. You don't have the help. Those are kind of voices we all live with.
Because of our mental conditioning, we unconsciously build a case on why we can't do something. You can't do that. You don't have any college training. You can't do that. You don't have the money. You don't have the contacts. That inner conversation is what's going to haunt you to go back leading a life of mediocrity, leading a life of poverty. It's a natural inclination for us to put ourselves down. See, we are born negative, I think, in a negative consciousness because we live in a negative world.
Don't let this negative world get to you. Don't let it win.
Stop beating up on yourself. You do it. I know you do it. I've done it.
Life is serious, and you have to be serious about taking care of your mental state.
You know life is gonna happen. Life is gonna throw some serious blows, and they gonna hurt. But don't let it bother you. You have to learn to turn and look at every obstacle as an opportunity. It's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to what happens to you that decides if you're going to be successful or not.
Because I think a lot of times when you look back, it's the darkest moments where you realize, holy cow, that's what projected me forward.
Even in your darkest moments and your lowest points in your life, you have resilience, toughness, inner strength. I got news for you. It can help develop your faith, because if you believe hard enough, it is really faith. You just got to transpose it into I hope this happened to I believe this can happen.
You got to find ways to increase your sense of self-appreciation, because if you don't, you're bombarded with negative stuff every day that beats you down, and you will find yourself unconsciously engaged in self-destructive behavior. If you don't program yourself, life will program you. So I'm saying learn to be your own booster. Start building yourself up. Start encouraging yourself. You've got to decide that I'm going to be fearless. I refuse to be denied. And I'm going to go all out. I'm going to be relentless. I don't care how many no's I encounter. You can't make a basket unless you shoot the ball. You can't hit a home run unless you take a swing at it. Most people won't even take a swing. Well, I probably won't make it anyhow. That's the conversation within. They probably won't give it to me anyhow. If you want something, you've got to be relentless. You've got to decide, I deserve this, and I'm going to have it. Turn a deaf ear to people that all they can do is talk about how negative things are because they have bought into the consciousness of the world. You don't know. Do you want something? You make up your mind. I'm not going to live like a cringing animal. I don't care how many speeches I have to give, how many seminars I have to give. I know I ain't got the money. I know I don't have the education. But I ain't going to let that stop me. I'm going to do it. Begin to recondition your mind, to retrain your thinking. Listen to things that can empower you, that can enable you to create a new reality for yourself, and a new life for yourself. You might appear to be strange around most people, but you've got to learn how to tune out the critics outside and the critic inside. You ignore that inner voice and all of the external voices. Don't judge the possibilities for what you can do based upon the circumstances, because the circumstances won't determine who you are. You don't care anything about the odds. When the dream is big enough, the odds don't matter. Start saying, I can do this. I can make this happen. Come on, man, get yourself together. You can do this. You can handle this. This is not a big deal. This too shall pass. You can handle this. You just haven't figured it out yet. You've got your gifts. You've got your talents. Stay focused on what you're doing. Focus your energy. That kind of self-talk drives back those voices of negativity that we all have and opens you up to the possibilities of expanding your life. You've got to be willing to prepare yourself and do the best you can. Take your best shot. Start working and developing yourself now and prepare yourself for what it is that you want, because you expect to get it.
You're going to have to run faster. You're going to have to run further. And you're going to have to jump higher. Reach inside for something else besides average or good. Something great.
I don't care what happens to you in life. What type of negativity happens?
You're going to take a L. Well, how are you going to respond? Life is your classroom.
It ain't failure if you learn from it. You fail a class, get back up and try again. You lose a job, get back up and try again. You put all your money in investment, get back and try it again. If you start a business and it don't work, don't stop, don't quit. Fail forward. Learn from each and every one of your mistakes. If you fall on your back so you can look up. Because if you can look up, then you can get up. I need you to have heart, because there's some things you just can't get without perseverance. You gotta position yourself and stop pouting. Stop looking at what other people are getting and look at what they're doing. And if you start doing it, you start getting it. You don't get out of life what you want. You get out of life what you earn. I stopped saying
If you stop stopping every time it gets hard, if you stop complaining and you face the goal and you face the obstacle and you put your heart and your mind into doing whatever it takes to get it done, I promise you, it's going to be the best year of your life.
And that was motivating. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now some meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now an article from the American Thinker. America is not an idea, it's a covenant of principles. And it's 9 minutes long.
America is not an idea. It is a covenant of principles. America was not founded on ideas, which are ephemeral. It was founded on principles, which are a fixed bedrock to which we can always turn. There is a phrase that has become almost liturgical in American political discourse, repeated so often by politicians, journalists, and intellectuals that it has acquired the unearned weight of self-evident truth. America is an idea. On May 4th, 2024, I witnessed Justice Neil Gorsuch repeat this claim, that American is a collection of ideas, on television while promoting his new children's book. He is grossly mistaken. The statement reflects a category error dressed up as profundity, and it's a consequential one. The United States of America is not an idea. It is a nation constituted upon principles, and the distinction is not merely semantic. It is the difference between a wish and a covenant, between a suggestion and a command, between the provisional and the enduring. To understand why this matters, we must be clear about what an idea actually is. An idea is a mental construct, fluid, provisional, often insightful, sometimes misguided. The theory of relativity began as an idea, but so did phrenology. Ideas can be adopted or discarded based on utility, popularity, or explanatory power. They derive their operative authority from acceptance. When people cease to accept an idea, its influence diminishes. A principle is categorically different. A principle is a foundational proposition that claims to reflect reality itself, not invented but discovered and articulated. Crucially, a principle claims validity independent of acceptance. It may require acceptance to be applied in practice, but it does not depend on acceptance to be true. The word itself derives from the Latin principium, a beginning, a foundation, a source from which other conclusions follow. A principle is not an ornament. It is a load-bearing wall. This distinction carries a consequence that is easy to overlook, but analytically decisive. When a principle is violated, the violation does not weaken the principle. It indicts the violator. A government that enslaves its people does not thereby redefine the principle that all men are created equal. It stands condemned by it. This differs fundamentally from an idea whose authority diminishes as acceptance declines. Principles function as fixed standards that evaluate conduct. Ideas more often reflect prevailing interpretations and shift with them. Consider the analogy that most clearly illuminates this distinction, the Ten Commandments. In the biblical account, they are presented not as suggestions, but as directives. Thou shalt, and thou shalt not. Murder is prohibited not because the ancient Hebrews found the notion useful, but because it violates a moral standard grounded in the sanctity of human life. The commandments are understood within their tradition as binding independent of compliance. Disobedience does not revise the standard, but constitutes a violation of it. They function as a measuring rod against which conduct is judged and found either faithful or wanting. The Declaration of Independence operates in a comparable register. It asserts all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights as self-evident truths, not tentative proposals, but foundational propositions intended to justify political action. The document proceeds deductively from principles about human nature and rights to conclusions about legitimate government. These claims are framed as valid regardless of whether they are honored. Violations are grounds for judgment, not revision. The Constitution deepens this framework by translating such principles into institutional form. Separation of powers, federalism, and enumerated rights are not experimental notions, but are, instead, structural safeguards grounded in a clear-eyed view of human nature and political power. James Madison in Federalist 51 argued for auxiliary precautions because men are not angels. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition, each branch given both the motive and the means to resist encroachment by the others. This is not an optimistic daydream of perfectible humanity. It is a realistic principle embedded in institutional design, intended to endure precisely because the tendencies it guards against never change. Constitutional principles do not evolve into their opposites. They stand as fixed points by which policy and governance are measured. These principles did not emerge in isolation. They draw from a range of intellectual and legal traditions, and among the deepest of these is the contribution of Judaism and the structure of Mosaic law. Mosaic law established something historically consequential, that law stands above rulers, and that even the highest human authority is subject to a higher standard. It reflects a conception of inherent human dignity and moral accountability that influenced centuries of Western thought. This inheritance flowed into English common law, into Puritan covenant theology, and ultimately into the American founding itself. The Liberty Bell carries words from Leviticus. The founders were not inventing novel political abstractions. They were recovering and constitutionalizing enduring truths with ancient roots. Principles are rooted. Ideas are airborne. The America is an idea formulation gained its strongest currency in the 20th century, often to emphasize openness and universality. At times, it is used loosely as shorthand for the nation's founding commitments. But even in that benign usage, it introduces a category error, substituting a weaker term for a stronger one. More consequentially, It is frequently used to reframe principles as mutable constructs rather than fixed standards. If the United States is merely an idea, its foundational commitments can be endlessly reinterpreted. Equality shifts from equality before the law to equality of outcomes. Liberty drifts from freedom from coercion to entitlement to provision. Constitutional limits become suggestions rather than commands. Whether intended or not, this framing moves authority from principle to preference, and the damage is not theoretical. Federal power has expanded far beyond enumerated limits. Administrative agencies now routinely exercise legislative, executive, and judicial functions simultaneously, in direct violation of the separation of powers principle that Madison considered essential to free government. An idea bends under such pressure. A principle resists, or, when violated, indicts. History refutes the idea thesis on its own terms. Revolutionary France proclaimed liberty, equality, and fraternity as ideas and descended into the terror, then Napoleon, then generations of instability. The Soviet Union was constructed on the idea of scientific socialism and collapsed under the weight of its falsehood. America endured civil war, world wars, the Great Depression, and profound cultural upheaval while maintaining the continuity of its constitutional system, precisely because its principles provided anchors that mere ideas could not. Lincoln at Gettysburg did not appeal to evolving ideas. He rededicated the nation to the principle of the Declaration, that all men are created equal, against the catastrophic idea of racial hierarchy. Martin Luther King Jr. described the Declaration as a promissory note, not a renegotiation of terms, but a demand that the nation honor what it had already solemnly pledged. That argument is only possible if the Declaration states principles. You cannot hold a nation to account for abandoning an idea. The distinction between idea and principle is ultimately one of authority. Ideas derive their influence from acceptance and are displaced by competing ideas. Principles claim authority from their correspondence to reality, natural, moral, and in the founder's own understanding, divine. When the Declaration appeals to the laws of nature and of nature's God, it is not proposing a pre-political claim about human nature open to democratic revision. It is asserting that its propositions are not invented but recognized, truths that existed before the document was written and will remain true long after any government rises or falls. To describe the United States as an idea is to risk something more serious than imprecision. It reframes binding principles as revisable constructs and severs the nation from the deep roots that gave those principles their force and durability. America is not whatever we say it is. America is what its principles declare it must be, a covenant renewed by each generation with the truths that made us free. Without principles, there is nothing to join, only something to redefine. Seen at the signing of the Constitution of the United States by Howard Chandler Christie.
Thank you. And now another article from the American Thinker called Right Liberalism is a Non-Starter.
Right liberalism is a non-starter. Moral sovereignty isn't going to cut it as a foundation for conservatism in the 2020s. Some time ago, a dispute arose between prominent right-leaning political commentators Carl Benjamin and James Lindsay regarding what might be the crucial fault line within anti-left discourse. Lindsay holds that modern far left, in veering into ideological collectivism, has deviated from the righteous path of liberal individualism, as has the right wing in propounding nationalist collectivism. Lindsay thus affirms a type of horseshoe theory, where liberalism, through its championing of strict, rights-based individualism, holds the straight and narrow line between collectivist nationalism on the purported woke right and collectivist identity politics on the woke left. Meanwhile, Carl Benjamin replies, correctly, that modern left-wing excess simply represents the natural progression of liberal premises to their logical conclusion. In support of his position, he observes that every attempt at liberal governance eventually succumbs to some variant of politically correct authoritarianism, the only question being whether they do it quickly as did the Jacobins and the Soviets, or slowly, as in the modern liberal West. The reason why Lindsay liberalism, essentially a libertarian reading of the post-war liberal consensus, is susceptible to leftward drift lies in its commitment to the principle of individual moral sovereignty. Lindsay liberals are committed moral individualists. They believe that every individual harbors a private sphere of sovereignty within which he has an absolute right to abide by his own conscience and pursue his own ends. Public ethics has no purview over the individual's values and actions within his private, sovereign space. Rather, public ethics serves to police the boundaries between individual zones of sovereignty to ensure that no individual oversteps his own rights domain and encroaches upon the rights of others. In particular, the state has no business instituting any substantive social ethic. It cannot establish any particular religious or cultural doctrine. It cannot encroach upon the individual's private domain of sovereignty. This philosophy is encapsulated in the ubiquitous dictum of naive liberalism, that everyone should be able to do as he pleases unless it harms someone else. Where Lindsay liberals claim to part ways with the far left is on the latter's insistence on moral egalitarianism. The difference between these two positions is that the liberal moral sovereigntist is content to allow the misfit the social space to be himself without state interference. The state must grant the nonconformist equal protection under law and must refrain from imposing upon his private domain. Its obligations end there. Meanwhile, the moral egalitarian holds that people of nonconforming disposition are entitled to equal recognition and validation within civic life. Any institution or cultural convention that marginalizes any minority group should be restructured until such disparities are rectified. The trans controversy illustrates the precepts of moral egalitarianism in action. The project of validating the trans identity entails redefining universally upheld conceptions of gender that were integrated into every facet of social life, from sports segregation to linguistic practices to dress codes. Accommodating this contingent's right to autonomous self-expression requires the wholesale reconstruction of social conventions in speech, dress, and association. This proved altogether too much for centrist liberals like Lindsay, who claims that this drive toward moral equality gives the state unlimited license to engage in massive social engineering in the name of cultivating inclusive attitudes. The problem for Lindsay is that moral egalitarianism is implicit in the principle of moral sovereignty. If all persons are created equal, and if these equal individuals are held to be sovereign over their own private, inviolable moral domain, it follows that all such personal moral domains must be created equal as well. Each of these private moral domains, under this reasoning, would be some individual's personal property. And as all individuals are equally entitled to their property, each individual would be equally entitled to operate within his moral domain. Note that under this framework, the very notion of moral truth becomes unintelligible in principle. Morality exists only as a mental emission of some private agent, and such mental emissions can bear no more truth value than could a bodily emission. A person's morality is an extension of that person, so if all individuals are equal, so are their respective moralities. The procedural liberal is thus hard-pressed to argue that social institutions can be built upon certain ethical worldviews while marginalizing or disparaging others. At best, the consistent liberal might resist aggressive, forceful measures to re-engineer social institutions and personal attitudes, out of respect for the moral integrity of all parties. But in the long run, liberals reliably push for ever greater inclusivity. Since they view all moral conceptions as being matters of personal preference, they can't make a strong case for why institutional structures should favor any moral frame over any other. If this sounds familiar, it is because it describes the ideological trajectory of centrist liberalism in every post-war Western democracy without exception. The egalitarian presuppositions underlying the doctrine of moral sovereignty link it closely not just to moral egalitarianism, but to material egalitarianism as well. Ultimately, if one is of an egalitarian disposition, any inequality, be it of material conditions or social standing, has to be justified. I have to assert why it is right that Peter should have more than Paul, be it more money, more respect, or more esteem. This can be done only by appealing to some moral paradigm. But as all moral paradigms are relegated to subjective opinion, no such appeal could carry any moral force. It merely would represent one opinion in a world full of opinions. Absent a way to arbitrate between competing values, equality wins by default. To contend effectively with the left requires the proclamation of real, objective virtue to justify real, objective inequality. Lindsay liberals, however, because they committed to individual moral sovereignty, will not permit any such principle to be asserted as real and binding. Ironically, they are united with the left in upholding egalitarianism as the sole metaphysical commitment that transcends individual subjectivity. This results in a fundamentally incoherent political program that futilely attempts to push back against egalitarian excess while refusing to assert any non-egalitarian moral principle that would enable them to do so. Whereas the broader liberal political tradition has ample resources with which to assert non-egalitarian moral principles, the sort of post-war right liberalism favored by Lindsay does not, because moral sovereignty is its core project and key preoccupation. This brand of liberalism was designed expressly to minimize moral constraints upon the individual, so as to grant him maximal moral and aesthetic autonomy. Expecting that this same toolbox, one constructed for the purpose of shattering the boundaries of convention and custom, could be used to put Humpty Dumpty back together again is a fantasy. Lindsay, himself a self-avowed libertine who began his public career as a truculent new atheist, embraces this form of absolute individualism precisely because of the transgressive license it affords him. In reality, if one is to walk back from the brink, one must change direction. This means, at the very least, to investigate those older branches of liberalism that presented it as a culturally embedded tradition.
And that was Right Liberalism is a Non-Starter from the American Thinker. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Professor Feynman.
You know what bothers me more than any unsolved equation in physics? It is the silence, the absolute, total, deafening silence from out there. We have got a galaxy with 400 billion stars in it, and most of those stars have planets going around them. And a whole lot of those planets sit in just the right zone to have liquid water and the kind of chemistry that leads to life. And the universe has been running for about 13 billion years, which is a very long time, long enough for life to have started, evolved, built cities, figured out physics, and sent signals across space 10,000 times over before our sun even formed. So where is everybody? That question, if you actually sit down and think about it carefully, does not just feel like idle curiosity. It starts to feel like one of the most important scientific questions ever asked. And I want to argue something specific here. I want to argue that gravity itself, the very same gravity that holds you in your chair right now, gives us a profound clue about why advanced civilizations either cannot exist in the way we imagine, or if they do, they are so deeply constrained by physics that watching us would be the last thing on their minds. Let me start with something that seems completely unrelated, a cannonball. Suppose I fire a cannonball straight up from the surface of the Earth. It goes up, slows down, and eventually comes back down. That is obvious. But if I fire it faster, it goes higher before coming down. And if I keep increasing the speed, eventually I hit a magic number, about 11 kilometers per second, where the cannonball just barely escapes the Earth entirely. It never comes back. That number is the escape velocity. Now here is the interesting thing. That same calculation, done with slightly different numbers, gives you the escape velocity from the solar system, from the galaxy, from galaxy clusters. Every bound gravitational system has a threshold speed you need to exceed if you want to leave it. And space is extraordinarily large, which means the energy you need to cross it is also extraordinarily large. Now, let me give you a sense of just how much energy we are talking about. Our nearest neighboring star system is Alpha Centauri, about 4 light-years away. If you wanted to send even a small probe, say something the mass of a car, across that distance in a reasonable time, maybe 100 years, you would need to accelerate it to about 4% of the speed of light. The kinetic energy required for that is roughly equivalent to the total energy output of every nuclear power plant on Earth running continuously for about 100,000 years. And that is just for a car-sized probe going to the nearest star. For a crewed ship, or for travel anywhere interesting in the galaxy, the numbers get so astronomical that they challenge everything we intuitively believe about what an advanced civilization could accomplish. But wait, you might say. What about a really advanced civilization? What if they have been around for 1,000,000 years and figured out energy sources we cannot imagine? That is a fair point, and physicists have actually tried to categorize this. There is a framework called the Kardashev scale, named after a Soviet astronomer, and it ranks civilizations by how much energy they can harness. A Type 1 civilization uses all the energy available on its home planet, something like 10 to the 16 watts. A Type 2 civilization has learned to harness the full output of its star, something like 10 to the 26 watts. A Type 3 civilization harnesses the entire energy output of its galaxy, around 10 to the 36 watts. We, right now, are sitting at about 10 to the 13 watts. We are not even a Type 1 yet. Here is what gravity has to say about the feasibility of becoming Type 2 or Type 3. Your star, sitting there fusing hydrogen into helium, is held together by gravity. The pressure inside a star is so immense, and the temperature so extreme, because gravity has compressed an enormous amount of hydrogen into a very small space. The energy that comes out is a byproduct of that gravitational compression, so the energy output of a star is fundamentally set by gravity and nuclear physics together. You cannot turn up the dial. You cannot make the sun produce more energy than its gravitational mass dictates. And to actually collect and use all of that energy, you would need to build a structure around the star, what theorists call a Dyson sphere, something with a radius of roughly the Earth-Sun distance, constructed from an amount of material that simply does not exist in nearby space. You would have to disassemble several planets, distribute the mass into a perfect shell, and do this without the shell itself collapsing inward under its own gravity or getting torn apart by tidal forces. The engineering constraints imposed by gravity alone make this spectacularly difficult. But let us say they figured it out somehow. Let us say there is a civilization 1,000,000,000 years old, and they built a Dyson sphere around their star. What can they do with all that energy? Well, they still cannot outrun the speed of light. That is not a technology problem. That is a fact about the geometry of space-time itself. Information cannot travel faster than light, and neither can matter with mass. So even if you have the energy output of a star at your disposal, crossing the galaxy, which is 100,000 light-years across, still takes a minimum of 100,000 years. One way. That is not a trip you plan. That is a commitment of civilizational resources over geological timescales. And gravity keeps making this worse, not better, because there is no clever shortcut. Wormholes are mathematically permitted by general relativity, but to hold one open you need exotic matter with negative energy density, something we have no evidence exists in the universe in usable quantities, and gravity itself fights to close any wormhole you try to stabilize. Now here is where I want to sharpen the argument about silence. If advanced civilizations are out there in large numbers, and some of them are genuinely millions of years ahead of us in technology, they would have had time to spread across the galaxy many times over, even at sublight speeds. A civilization expanding at just 1% of the speed of light, taking thousands of years to hop between stars, could still colonize the entire Milky Way in about 10 million years. The galaxy is roughly 13 billion years old. So the question is not just where are their signals, the question is where are they physically? Why has no civilization sent even a self-replicating probe that has been quietly copying itself from star system to star system for the last billion years? Where is the evidence, anywhere in our solar system or nearby space, of past or present engineering by another species? There is nothing. And gravity has a lot to do with why. Think about what it takes to launch anything significant into interstellar space. The escape velocity from the surface of an Earth-like planet is about 11 kilometers per second. The escape velocity from the solar system, starting from Earth orbit, is about 42 kilometers per second. These numbers mean that every kilogram you want to send to another star requires enormous energy expenditure just to get it out of the gravitational well of your own home system. Gravity is not an enemy you defeat with cleverness. It is a constant tax on every gram of material and every joule of energy you want to move around the cosmos. And the deeper you start in a gravity well, the higher that tax is. Now here is a specific piece of physics that I think is underappreciated in this conversation. There is something called the rocket equation, and it was figured out by a Russian schoolteacher named Tsiolkovsky in the early 20th century. It says that the amount of fuel you need to achieve a given velocity grows exponentially with that velocity. Not linearly, not quadratically, but exponentially. So if reaching 1% of light speed requires carrying, say, 10 times your payload mass in fuel, then reaching 2% of light speed requires roughly 100 times your payload mass in fuel. Reaching 10% of light speed requires staggering fuel fractions that make the whole enterprise almost absurd, unless you have some truly exotic propulsion system. And gravity is the thing sitting underneath all of this, because fuel itself has mass, and mass is what gravity acts on. Chemical rockets, which is what we use today, are fantastically inefficient for interstellar travel, because the energy stored in chemical bonds is tiny compared to what you need. Even nuclear rockets, using fission or fusion reactions, are far better, but still face the exponential wall of the rocket equation. The only plausible escape from this wall, in terms of known physics, is something like a laser sail, where you accelerate a very thin, very light object using a focused beam of light from a fixed installation. The Breakthrough Starshot project has actually studied this seriously, aiming to send gram-scale probes to Alpha Centauri at roughly 20% of light speed using a large laser array. But those probes cannot slow down at the destination without a second laser array there waiting for them, and the communication round trip at light speed would still take 8 years per exchange. This is the universe gravity and relativity have conspired to build, where even the most optimistic, realistic scenarios for interstellar travel are extraordinarily costly and slow. So I want to put a different kind of hypothesis on the table. What if the silence is not a mystery at all, but a prediction? What if gravity, combined with the fixed speed of light, makes genuine interstellar civilization not just difficult, but so energy expensive and time-consuming that it simply does not happen at scale, not even for civilizations vastly older than ours? The universe may be full of life that stayed home. Intelligent species that looked up at the stars, did the same physics we did, concluded that the cost-benefit ratio of interstellar expansion is prohibitive, and turned their attention inward instead, to managing their own biosphere, to building incredibly rich local environments, to whatever a billion-year-old civilization does when it decides that crossing the void is not worth it. And here is the interesting thing about that hypothesis. It predicts the silence we observe. If most civilizations, once they reach a certain level of technological sophistication, conclude from their own physics that the stars are too expensive to reach, then the galaxy would look exactly like what we see. Empty, quiet, with no megastructures, no signals, no probes showing up in our solar system. Not because life is rare, but because gravity and the speed of light are universal laws that every civilization in every star system must obey equally, and those laws make the cosmos a very hard place to colonize. Now, I want to be honest about the limits of this argument. It does not prove there are no advanced civilizations. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, as they say, and physics allows for possibilities we have not thought of yet. Maybe there are forms of propulsion based on physics we do not yet understand. General relativity does permit solutions to Einstein's equations where space itself is warped in ways that could in principle move a ship faster than light without violating local causality. The Alcubierre metric is the famous example. But the energy requirements to do this, as calculated by physicists, involve negative energy in amounts that make the entire mass energy of the observable universe look small. Gravity, again, is the enforcer here. It does not bend easily. What I find genuinely exciting about all of this is not the pessimistic interpretation, but the clarifying one. Gravity is not just a force that keeps your feet on the ground. It is a universal constraint that shapes what is possible for any physical being anywhere in the cosmos. The same equations that Galileo started working out by rolling balls down ramps, that Newton organized into a single breathtaking framework, that Einstein then revealed as the geometry of curved space-time, those same equations put hard limits on what intelligence anywhere in the universe can accomplish at large scales. We are not alone in facing those limits. Every civilization that ever existed or ever will exist is bound by the same physics. And that thought, to me, is one of the most profound things physics tells us. The silence out there is not necessarily a sign that we are special or unique or alone. It may simply be a sign that gravity is the same everywhere, that light speed is the same everywhere, and that the universe, for all its vast size, has built walls around every neighborhood within it. We look up and see nothing watching us. And maybe the reason is not that the watchers do not exist. Maybe it is that gravity gave them the same lecture it is giving us, and they listened.
And that was Professor Feynman. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you're not neutral and that the government has no rights.